Hi there. So the last few days have been really interesting for me. I've had to go through a pretty painful experience of having to rethink my model. Known that the model, which is those 11 triggers that I've been obsessed with, describe how we can, as marketers, understand, anticipate, and influence shopper behavior. I've always I've always known that it's going to take a lot more effort to get it perfectly right. And so what's happened over the last couple of days is that I've rethought it and trying to essentially break it down and maybe reconstruct it and create a much more elegant description. And so that's been a very interesting thing. And so in that process, I've been thinking a lot about system 1 and system 2. So before we kind of move forward, I want to just again reiterate and redefine what system 1 and what system 2 are. So system 1 is it's the emotional response of shoppers. It's a very fast system, so it happens very instinctively. And system 2 is more of the rational response of shoppers. It's much slower, and the brain is very lazy. So the brain is doesn't want to use system 2 unless it absolutely has to. So that's the easiest way to kind of think about system 1 and system 2. Now, the core of this entire model, this entire process, is this question of when a consumer makes a purchase decision, whether it is to stay at a hotel, whether it is to select a doctor, whether it is to select a wife, whether it is to buy a product, it doesn't matter. When a consumer makes a decision, is that decision driven by rationality, or is it based on emotions? And if someone is absolutely convinced that it is based on rationality, then my entire model is irrelevant to them, because it my model is based on system 1 thinking. It's based on the emotional cues that used to make decisions. So that's the first thing, is that we have to come to an agreement that we have to assume, and in fundamentally believe that that's the case, for me at least, is that all decisions are based on emotions. So that's the first thing I want to kind of set aside. Now, when you start looking at it from that perspective and saying, okay, well, it is driven by emotions, then some really interesting things start appearing. So, for example, one very unique phenomena, which I see all the time, which every marketer is aware of, is as the consumer is moving along the funnel, they're kind of moving along the funnel just as we'd expect, which is great, and we want them to get to the conversion point. And at some random point across that consumer funnel, they abandon for some reason that we can't explain. It just doesn't make any sense. And that's a really frustrating thing for us as marketers, is when those things happen. But it's a reality. It's a very interesting phenomena. And all of the techniques that we're using to influence the shopper, what they effectively do is they cause a reset, right? So, like when I think about the triggers that I've worked on, like serendipity, like scent trail, like visualization, all of these triggers are essentially effectively resetting the user. Like a momentary reset. Now, this is very interesting because you have to understand that system 1 and system 2 are completely different, but they actually kind of fall within a continuum. And so what I mean by that is, when we start off doing something, we always start by system 1. System 1 is always the default state. And then depending on how the consumer's brain is wired, they're able to activate system 2. Some people can activate it fairly quickly, and some people take a much longer time to activate it. But if you look at a time horizon, you'll find that system 1 is always the default state, and then depending on what our messaging is, depending on the psychological makeup of the shopper, they will at some point activate system 2. And so when you look at your funnel and you find that there is this random abandonment that happened, that is when system 2 has been activated. And what it means is, by the time system 2 has been activated, we have not made a compelling enough argument for why the consumer should choose us. Because remember, the shopper is using system 2 to justify system 1. So we have to make some clear choice options. We have to present some clear choice options in front of the consumer. Now, if you think about it as a reset, if you think about all the triggers as a reset, that raises an interesting question. It's certainly a question that I had, which is that if a consumer is already on system 1, why would I introduce a trigger to cause a reset? Because isn't that dangerous? Don't I want to keep them on system one? I mean, my objective as a marketer in an ideal world is to keep the consumer in system one mode all the way through, because that's how I can influence them. If they are completely in system two mode, then then I have very little to control them with. So I really want them to stay in system one state as long as I can. And so all of these triggers cause a reset. And as a marketer, I'm nervous about the fact that, well, what if my consumer is already in system one? If I'm resetting them, then could that reset cause them to get out of that trance state and move to system two? And the fact is that the thing to keep in mind is that whenever the reset happens, remember we already said that system one is always the default mode. So the reset will lead to system one again. So if the consumer is in system two mode, the reset, which is the trigger, will cause them to move to system one, which is what we would want. Perfect. However, if they're in system one mode and we use a trigger to cause a reset, then too, they will be back to system one, right? So they're resetting from system one back to system one. So we're still achieving the goal. The end objective of a reset, a successful reset, is the consumer moves to system one state, which is what we want. So I just wanted to as I'm playing through some of these things in my mind, I wanted to share it with you. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.